Besnowed by Bauer. Chapter 1. Aurora Sunrise. It's been 5 years since we came home. 5 long years away from family and friends, stuck behind the tall stone walls of Veronum City in the name of protection. There was always a new war, always a new pandemic, always a new excuse. Some kind of fatal flaw raging through the greater world. What was rarer was travel within the continent being so disrupted for so long. Something serious from across the strait, raising barriers higher. All we could do is pray and try to celebrate the holidays as best we can. A phone call or a radio message may never be as firm as a kiss and a hug, but the kind words are always a warm welcome. The trip is long and the route is barren. The ideal conditions for a drifting sleep-deprived mind to get in its own way. Old memories hiding in the mist. Nostalgia masked by the frost. Moments stuck in dewdrops against the wind. Time freezes at our edge of the world. Wisps of whim and crystalline dreams preserved in an eternally twilight sky. The sting of the cold and the bite of the wind keeps us all closer. And we survive the darkest nights by staying close together. Mom would always repeat the same lessons on how important it is to bundle up in layers. Coats and furs to match the weather. Deep breaths freezing the very air inside your lungs. Life itself adding to the weight of the atmosphere. Getting dressed to go outside used to take upwards of an hour. I guess it still does back in Besnowed, back home, away from the comforts of the city, in the wild of the frontier village. That was our reality growing up. Me and my sisters double-checking every layer before we were allowed to take a step past the front door. For anyone from our small village, that was only half the story anyway. Bundle up to go outside, check your layers and cover any and all exposed skin, minimize the minutes as you move from one building to the next or from the market tents to St. Vincent's Church. I'm sure Lumi has similar enough stories about how she grew up. We're both from Besnowed after all. It's hard to put into perspective how long we've been together. I imagine neither of us ever thought we'd share this life when we were kids. Our families didn't have a lot in common, and we lived on opposite ends of the village. Coming home for the holidays, or really the feeling of Frithlik Nyan in general, tends to bring up these emotions. I end up reliving the journey of how we fell in love every year. The closest person in my life has always been a neighbor. She was my best friend when we moved to Veronum and helped make the pain of missing home easier to bear. But from the first moment we held hands, it was clear where we were heading. A stronger feeling than we could have known at the time. And now here we are with our own life in the city. That feeling of true warmth is harder to describe. The closest comparison for me is the church. Our thoughts and prayers lighting the flame in St. Vincent's hands. She provides us that life-sustaining heat, reaching from the highest peak to match the sun and the moon. St. Vincent's triumph is felt in her promise of another safe tomorrow. Our faith keeps that warmth deep in our hearts. Without it, we would have long since succumbed to the desolate cold. Villagers often carry sacred wards to remind themselves of that faith. Something physical to hold as you pray, a representation of her guidance and her flame. Jade necklaces and colorful ball ornaments, decorative candles and bright red banners, beaded chains and lucky bracelets. Personal and familial preferences usually dictate which object is used by whom, but the feeling is nearly the same for everyone. As the train continued down the path, I was thinking about a very specific charm, though. A dream catcher Lumi made with the kids in the months leading up to our trip to Besnowed. The simple loop with its web pattern holds more specific powers. I can remember Grandma telling stories about little nest makers leaving wards in the wild. The details would shift and change as she got older, but it always involved St. Vincent's crystal spider and a wandering soul haunted by nightmares. The moral was always about finding peaceful sleep under a dream catcher left by her pet. These days, dream catchers are a common gift for new parents. Something to help the baby sleep through the night. So when we heard Lumi's sister was pregnant, we thought it'd be nice to give her a dream catcher. We stored it in one of our bags, but traveling with 2 kids can make you second-guess where exactly things are. In the rush to catch the train and not forget the kids, it's possible we accidentally left it on the kitchen counter. I was getting irrationally worried as we moved closer to Besnowed. All that time away meant this visit needed to be perfect. The perfect holiday for my family. The perfect Frithlik Nyan. The biggest celebration of the year, with everyone across the continent coming together. It didn't matter whether you were from Verenum or Besnowed, we all looked forward to Frithik Nyan. That idyllic perfection was all the more important with so many years since the last time we returned. Even with the dates all set well in advance, there was enough leeway for train delays or worse weather. Mortal time is more flexible outside the city where infrastructure yields to nature. I often wonder how my kids, Ren and Zori, feel about these things. They're so used to reliable schedules and calendars imposing their will over the seasons. Verenum is built from the ground up to allow for that kind of life. Stone walls rising up as high as the tallest mountain slopes, a vertical city on the coast, a bulwark against the tide staring across the strait. We live in the main residential district just past the second inner wall, well protected from the outside threats and well connected to everywhere and everyone within Verenum. No matter the weather or the season outside the walls, the kids can always go to school and Lumi and I can always go to work. For 5 years we did just that, closed to the rest of the continent as quarantines dictated limited movement. Only now can we finally leave, finally return home. Zori probably doesn't have any memories from before the quarantine measures. The last time she met everyone was when she was just a baby, more like a sack of potatoes than a person with a personality. She knows who her extended family is, though. We talk on the radio and send letters and videos when possible. Ren remembers more. He's friends with his cousins, and we used to go back every year for Frithik Nyan. He knows the traditions and how our families have their own feasts. The little details on the hams and the dumplings. I can even remember him working with Lumi's father to stuff handmade sausages. He's grown a lot in the last few years, though. He doesn't share everything with his parents, but we know he's thinking about university. He has dreams of studying at a prestigious school across the strait. There's something poetic about my own son wanting to move farther still away. Swefin? Lumi whispered my name from the other side of the cramped cabin car. She was nestled in with Ren and Zori on a cot. I got the bench with barely any legroom between our luggage and the window. Yes, Lumi? What time is it? I think we're coming up on morning. It'll be dark by the time we get to my old house. Is that Mount Vincent? Lumi pointed out the window across the snow-covered forest. There was a tall mountain peak just visible between the branches, the soft lights of an eternally mixing dusk and dawn split by its stature, the very symbol of the saint herself. It all looks so different now. Reforestation was a success. St. Vincent's triumph really did lead to our salvation. It wouldn't be a Frithik Nyan without it. The mix of well wishes and blessings were always tinged and tainted by the different flavors of our history. Our home, by any measure, was hostile to life. The land where Besnowed stands was nothing but an icy desert for eons. Permafrost in every direction, with the only hint of hope found down the long arms of the coastline. Places like where the original Verenum colony first settled in. How many years has it been? 5? Lumi's question surprised me a bit. Travel bans being listed and how that would affect the holidays was all anyone could talk about for months. The small talk about how long 5 years could feel like was the icebreaker of the season. No. I mean, since they started the reforestation initiative. Oh, that. It's been multiple generations now, but it didn't take root into ours. I don't really think about it much, but being away for so long makes it obvious. There's even more trees out here than in Verenum. Reforestation was so integrated into the history of the continent for us, we often forgot how it fit on the timeline. It was something that started vaguely in the distant past, and now that it was actually working, all that mattered was how it made life easier. Verenum has been settled for as long as the continent has a memory, going back to a time before the governments of the world reached into the stars for more resources. Always the same story, extraction and exploitation. We grew up hearing rumors of penal colonies set up in the asteroid belt and beyond. Our government was never powerful enough to really contend with it all. Better to settle with a slice of the world no one would bother fighting over. I think there were already plenty of trees during our grandparents' time. I know I remember hearing Grandpa talk about how he received some kind of stipend to build the log cabin out in the outskirts of Besnowed. They were supporting that kind of thing when he was young. I'm not sure how much I believed my own answer. It made sense in a way, but I was putting the pieces together to make them fit the image I already had in my mind. It was probably soon after St. Vincent's triumph and the war ended. Trees have always been an important part of Frithicnyan after all. Lumi made a good point. We could agree on a fuzzy idea of when it all must have happened, sometime after the war and early enough to influence how we celebrate the holiday today. Mommy? Zori woke up as our whispers grew louder. Her hair was a mess from sleeping tucked in between her brother and her mother. I couldn't help but smile as she rubbed her eyes and began looking out the window toward Mount Vincent. Are we almost there? Not quite, Zori. Lumi was a little annoyed that we would have to help Zori fall back asleep now. We both were, really. Our idle chit-chat was about to end, and we were both hoping to get a little more sleep before we pulled into Besnowed station. Is that St. Vincent? Zori pointed out the window past the snow-covered trees to the highest peak on the horizon. Yes, but let's not wake up your brother. We'll be there soon enough, so let's get some rest first. I glanced over at Lumi to let her know I would be handling our daughter, and she mouthed out a silent thank you to me in response. I love her more every day. We were both so much older now, but that magic spark never flickered. As bright and warm as her flame. But I'm not sleepy. Zori, come to Daddy and we'll watch the trees and look out for St. Vincent's spider, okay? Okay. Zori shook off her blankets and came over to the bench on the other side of the cramped cabin. She found a comfortable spot in my arms, but didn't seem to want to fall asleep as she tried to focus on the trees in the forest passing by the window. Daddy, tell me the story about St. Vincent and how she saves everyone for Frithicnyan. Didn't you hear that one already last night? Zori was all too excited to learn more about the holiday. She knew most of the standard traditions, the gift-giving, and some of the more common dishes. All the customs we kept in our version in Verenum. Yes, but I want to hear it again. Riding the Aurora and how St. Vincent gives everyone gifts. Zori's version of the story was so different from what children in Besnowed understood. She loved the fanciful flight and the extravagant details of how St. Vincent visited every home on the continent. Well, okay. First we need to tell the story of St. Vincent's triumph in the first Frithicnyan. I looked over at Lumi and nodded with a soft expression as I mimed a heart with my hands. I love you too, Swefin. She relaxed into a more comfortable position with all the new space on the cot, taking a moment to make sure Ren was nice and tucked in. He was at that age where he'll sleep through anything. All those whispers and the excitement of his sister, early morning conversation quickly moving past his ears. St. Vincent's triumph is about the war, isn't it? Zori made sure I didn't lose focus as she moved her eyes up to line up with mine. It was now story time, and she would be sure not to forget that fact. That's right, Zori. Do you remember how it happened? She helped the soldiers, right? Exactly. But before she descended from the highest mountain to help our ancestors, there was the Summit Council with all the 7 saints. Saint Denali and Saint Himavan were some of the first to support Saint Vincent as she told the council her plan. Daddy, what did she tell them? She said that her favorite people in the world needed her help. Only with the aid of her flame could we find the warmth to continue living. But some of the saints didn't agree with her plan. Do you remember what changed their minds, Zori? Frithicnyan. So you do pay attention while I tell the story. Daddy! I'm just teasing. Yes, St. Vincent promised the other saints that we would always remember their help by creating the holiday. Peaceful warmth in her heart and righteous glory in her flame. St. Vincent descended from the highest mountain to save our ancestors. She rode an Aurora across the horizon and with the help of her crystal spider spun a web of protection for all of us. Like a big dream catcher. I guess it is kind of like a big dream catcher. Kids find a way to point out the bits you miss after being too familiar with the details. I had never thought of St. Vincent's triumph being like a very large dream catcher, but the comparison was obvious as soon as Zori mentioned it. So now she visits our homes. You already know everything, Zori. She rides in Aurora and gives us all presents. Her spider helps too, of course. How much of the story was true is hard to say. I know it'll be my job to make Zori think St. Vincent herself left us a few gifts at my old home, but I do believe she saved our ancestors during the war. Without her miracle and her blessing, there is no other way we could have won. Zori settled down at the end of the story. She was busy thinking about all the gifts St. Vincent could leave her and was soon dreaming them into reality as her breathing steadied into sleep. 5 years. We were all going to feel the cold this time. Even though me and Lumi were raised in that countryside wilderness, the reality was always surprising. Our bodies were now used to the warmer weather within the walls of the city. Villages like Besnowed don't even have pipes. They can't. Everything freezes too quickly, including the pipes. I don't think it's impossible, especially in the face of all the success from reforestation. But like most things, it's just a question of funding and economics. The villagers are used to the cold anyway. Everyone learned from a young age to respect the harsh nature outside, or they'd soon be meeting St. Vincent in the sky. I know, for anyone born and raised in Verenum, that sounds morbid at best. But growing up out there, it never was. We respected the cold like we respect the seven saints, our prayers providing warmth and confidence for our future. The frigid air pairs well with the warmth of Frithik too. Seasonal nostalgia as another year comes and goes, warm emotions reflecting her flame for generations and generations. That part is common to all humans on the planet. We adapt, we overcome, we thrive. Life in Besnowed was no different. The extra blankets we brought from home probably helped as well. A veritable sty as the fabric swirled in different directions on the cot. We used to call that kind of thing a nest growing up in my family. I can remember making them every year when my sisters and I were still young. At least until my oldest sister had more than 12 winters. Winters. My mind falls into the old ways when I slip into these memories. We measure years like that in Besnowed. How many winters you survived. There were other seasons, but none were more important than winter. It reminds me of how the village comes alive during the civil twilight hours. Red banners on every wall and colorful lights strung up inside. The holiday is all about celebrations and feasts. Traditions as an excuse for everyone to gather and stay warm. Neighbors and friends sharing gossip and carols. Families walking through the central plaza to attend St. Vincent's Church and the first tree. We all carried hope in our hearts despite the harsh weather outside. In the afternoon and evenings, every feast painted a similar scene. Families sat around well-lit tables filled with more dishes than the guests could ever possibly finish eating. Whether the main course was roasted ham, fresh fish, or platefuls of dumplings mattered little to the emotions shared from one side of the table to the other. All the aunts and uncles, grandparents and cousins, everyone piling in at the end of the night and commandeering the children's rooms. Us kids would then work with our cousins to find every blanket in the house and put together a few nests. Our beds for the night. It was a mess, but it made the whole house feel a few degrees warmer. We loved every second of it, from reaching into the old cabinets and finding our favorite pillows to carving out a new section of the living room to set up another nest. It was the kind of excitement kids love getting into. Unfortunately, only the cot had room for a nest on the train. My spot on the bench could only afford a few spare blankets and an extra pillow in an attempt to find some semblance of comfort. Of course, with Zori, most of that was tucked into her sleeping arms as she softly dreamed away the hours until our arrival. As long as my family is comfortable, I don't mind where or how I need to sleep. I still had the nice view out the window at any rate. And every inch of that horizon held special memories for me and Lumi. The sun hiding in an endless dawn, dim light reflecting off the vast sea of snow, a quiet calm in an icy forest. All that and more helps calm my more frantic thoughts. If I were to try to sum up my thoughts on what Frithik means to me, it'd be something along those lines. Less about the scriptures and St. Vincent and more about the time my family gets to spend together. Feasts and fireworks, gifts and music, family and friends. Besnowed during the holidays has an endless source of warmth even in the darkest and coldest hours of the night. Seeing Lumi drifting off into a deeper sleep next to Ren reminded me of all that. How we share so much love for each other, a warm glow lighting the way through frost and fog. All I could do is let myself fall into the more relaxing rhythms of the train, each car buckling in cycles, the overworked engine steaming on ahead, those rickety chirps and whirling cracks a reminder of the passage of time. No matter how far away we were, Besnowed would always be our home. The pristine snow covering everything, everywhere. It's all so different from how we live in Verenum. We still get plenty of snow, but there's much less of a community around staying warm. Neighbors don't help shovel paths and salt roads. The city government takes care of it all. I wouldn't be surprised if both Zori and Ren don't even know how much work goes into making the coldest months feel like a flowery spring. The stone walls block out most views of the coast and leave room for nothing more than the highest mountain peaks, if they can rise above the tallest towers. To people from Besnowed, that can start to feel like a prison, but it's much more like a walled garden. The streets are lined with trees, and there is always a park a few blocks away. The sloping slabs rising and falling into and out of the different districts give every path a new feeling as you explore the shops and restaurants. The expansive nature of Verona made it easy to survive 5 years of quarantine. For Ren, it probably wasn't very different from life before, outside of us no longer taking trips to Besnowed. For Zori, it's all she's ever known. Yet still, I can't help but think about how Dad says they need to know more about the old ways. They're proud of their heritage, but Besnowed is almost like another planet for them. For Ren and Zori, their home is a place where bright lights drown out the sky and dim the stars. I always get into my head too much. I should have just tried to drift off for a few more hours of sleep, especially when I was already feeling the beginnings of a seasonal sickness, a quick grip, or some type of cold. But that was just how things always were. I always ended with a stuffy nose and cough by the time we arrived in Besnowed. Sweffin? Lumi woke up again just as I was falling back asleep. I gave her a tired smile as I tried to move as little as possible to not wake Zori. Yes, Lumi? Did you remember where we packed the dreamcatcher? I think Zori wanted it in her bag. She really wants to be the one to give your sister the gift. I rocked Zori in my arms slightly, and Lumi smiled at how sweet our daughter could be. She worked with Lumi to make the dreamcatcher. The plan was to give it to my sister-in-law as a protective charm for the newly announced baby. Please check again before we arrive. I don't want to forget Lynn's gift on the train. I will, don't worry. Lumi was satisfied with the response, and I could finally let my own eyes drift into the soft yellows and reds of the distant twilight sky outside the window. Patches of light flashing between the needles and pines, with the lucky winter flower shining bright in dull pastels. Our first Frithik Nyan with the whole family in 5 years. Going home to Besnowed, our small village at the halfway stop between nowhere